So for this next story, it's very upsetting.
The same political leadership that turned down the money needed to put more of an effort of telling people, hey, we won't be able to save all of you in time. So you need to make real efforts to have a contingency plan in place for these floods.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So for this next story, if it was my child, I wouldn't have her listen to it. It's very upsetting. During the 4th of July floods in Texas, there were many calls placed to 911. And unfortunately, in one of the situations, in one of the jurisdictions affected, there were only 2 people on duty in the 911 operating center, where they had hundreds of calls. And these were calls, many of them, where the people were near death and doomed. And they were doomed because of the fury of the floods. It would appear, although I don't know that this was explicitly stated, that they might have had some degree more emergency capacity than they were able to use, but that there was a bottleneck because there were so few 911 operators working during this major disaster. You had people saying, I'm dead in 5 minutes, and indeed he did die. You have people there, no, please stay on the line with me, I'm very scared. This is a failure of society to act like a society. This, to me, represents the erosion of society in the name of cost saving. And we can have a discussion about, like, how many dollars per pupil is a good idea to spend on their schooling, and we can have a discussion about if somebody is very ill, the percentage chance to survive if we're going to invest in expensive treatments. A well-staffed 911 operations service during a disaster is no great expense compared to what it can bring. So I would encourage, if you are ready to get bummed out, and if you are ready to understand, let me try to put it in a polite term, what a sort of radical cost-cutting libertarian ethos has wrought upon our society, our countrymen and women, our fellow people in Texas in AD 2025. Just terrible. Just awful. What do you think, Mike?
A couple things. So there's a pretty common saying, when seconds count, the cops are minutes away. We live in a world of finite resources. Full stop. There's only so many places that emergency responders can get to in time, and there's only so many phones and operators that can be available for a situation like this, because the issue here was it was a flash flood, which means that it's 6 hours or less between the time that the rainfall occurs and the flooding occurs. When you're talking about something like the United States, distance is a big factor because the United States is a very big country. You need cars to get from place to place. You can't really walk, you can't really bike, you can't really take a bus. You can take a bus, but it takes resources that are more expensive than just a wagon or a boat or something, like a wooden boat. But the problem in this circumstance that happened was that even if all those calls had gotten in on time, even if all the emergency responders had showed up, it's not so clear that they would have been able to save everyone, because you need special equipment and tools to actually go through the floodwaters, right? Because remember, the floods were overtaking cars, and if the emergency response was only going to be using like cop cars or fire engines or something, then you're limited by the amount of tools you have at your disposal. So at that point, yes, I agree with you that it's a failure of emergency preparedness, but it's a failure of a different kind. It's a failure in the sense that they're not equipping everybody who lives in these areas prone to flooding with some of the tools that could be available to them to survive the flood. So what do I mean by that? If you're stuck on a boat in the middle of the ocean or a big ship, you have a lifeboat. The lifeboat is a fully contained, self-surviving vessel. If you've ever seen the movie Captain Phillips, you'll know what I'm talking about. A completely contained vessel that can be submerged underwater, that contains water, food, the ability to survive in water for a while. The fact that they had no areas people could go to in the case of extreme flooding is one of those issues. So why do they now have an emergency shelter equipped to withstand flooding somewhere within the vicinity of those areas? Like, emergency response is a last ditch effort to stop something from happening. Part of the issue in this case was that there wasn't sufficient warning that the floods were happening, or rather, there may have been a warning if you knew where to look, but there wasn't an effective way of dispersing that warning to everybody who would be affected, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Radio, cell phones, internet, of communicating the information in a timely manner so that people could adequately respond to the problem without needing to rely on calling 911 at the last second. This is something I think that it's actually a really sad commentary on the situation of developed nations, is that there's an over reliance on the systems we have, of the institutions that are available to us. When you're talking about something like the United States, that's a very partisan political environment, certain parts of the country have a real disdain, not apathy, but a real revulsion or a real ingrained social mentality to not help each other with tax money, with government resources. And so that means in this situation is the one I'm thinking of for the floods. When they applied for federal flood assistance from FEMA or from Texas, the timeline of what happened there is pretty galling. Like, why weren't they just given the resources they needed? The Biden administration had offered to give them the resources. My understanding is the resources were turned down. What's that? Why would they turn down free money and resources to help them? Yeah, the Biden administration offered $10 million from the American Rescue Plan to Care County, Texas, but officials didn't use it for flood warning sirens, opting for other projects like law enforcement. They were given the resources to address the problem, and they chose not to address the problem. That effectively means that the people in this county elected officials that helped cement the issues that occurred. This is where it gets into that really thorny issue of how do you address collective action problems if the people living in a place are unwilling to address it themselves collectively. And that's where something like FEMA exists, where they can override local officials and provide assistance directly to people. They can give them money and resources. But when you have something like what's going on now with the Trump administration saying that he wants to get rid of FEMA entirely, just leave it to the states, then you're going to get wildly divergent outcomes of some states that actually care about utilizing the resources they have to address the problems in an effective and timely manner, and some states not, like having a real aversion to actually helping people in any meaningful or significant way. That anytime they get resources, it goes to like prisons and cops, not flood warnings, 911 operators, giving everybody a raft. There's a whole list of issues that occurred in this story that it's very sad, right? People calling and saying, I have minutes to live and then dying. That sucks. But the hard truth of the situation is there's only so much that a society can do with what you're talking about with 911 operators and emergency response. At some point, people have to devise ways to survive or they don't. In this circumstance, for something like a flood, there's got to be a way to survive. Boats, rafts, like a safe room or something that's insulated, a giant breathing tube going way up in the sky.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Think of it like a concrete bunker from a nuclear disaster where everything goes to hell and you live in a self-contained living environment for a while. These exist, right?
Yeah, like in the Fallout series.
Sure.
You ever played that?
I have, and I've seen the show. But no, I'm actually thinking of, there's a movie I saw about a guy who's got these premonitions about a giant storm that's coming. I'm trying to remember what the...
Sounds like Noah, but something like that, yeah.
No, the point of this movie is this guy, he's got these like nonstop visions and premonitions that just say gigantic earth altering apocalyptic storms headed their way. He builds his own self contained shelter at great expense, personally and professionally, because he just spends all his money, everything he has, to build this thing. And the point is that like these technologies exist. It's just again a question of political will, but also resources. People don't have the means to build it themselves. But no, it's really sad because I'm struggling to think of like in real time if a flood is occurring that's so great that it can cover a whole car.
Yeah.
What precisely would emergency responders actually be able to do? Even if all the calls got
Right.
through in a perfect scenario, every single
Yeah.
call got through, every single resource that could be allocated could they still be saved? And the question is, who knows? I'm not so sure that it would have been, they could have saved some people, I'm sure, if they got there in time and they got them out.
That's what I'm saying. Some people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But a scenario where everybody gets saved, at some point,
that's too much to hope for.
Yeah, you don't want to leave an emergency to prayer and a chance, right? That people on some level, even in a civilized society with functioning infrastructure, you want to equip them with the tools to actually survive something. And that there needs to be real political effort to make that part happen of giving people the tools to survive a flood. We understand water, we understand debris, and we understand that the place they were in was prone to flooding. Like they knew that floods existed. You wouldn't spend millions of dollars, like the government wouldn't allocate millions of dollars, $10 million for a flood warning system if there's no floods. It's an area that they know floods. That means you don't leave things to chance. You make houses that can float. You make cars that are amphibious. Look, cars can become amphibious. There are ways to make cars drive into water. I'm not kidding. We know they exist. And the question becomes, is that technology, is adapting to that environment more costly than the rebuild efforts, than all the lawsuits, than all the fallout from what happened? And if the answer is no, then they should have done that at least. There should have been more of an effort than nothing to become equipped to survive a flood. People in places where there are tornadoes, they have tornado shelters, right? They do. They go into a bunker in the ground. People in places where they have hurricanes, they board up their houses, right? Think of hurricane floodwaters where you know there's going to be a hurricane and you know that there's going to be a surge, right? That the water is going to go up 10 feet, 12 feet. What do people do? We don't hear about them getting overcome with sometimes Katrina, yes, that happened and sucked because the levee broke. That really sucked.
Yeah.
If you want to see a show about that, of what desperation looks like, 5 days at Memorial Hospital is pretty brutal of what it looks like when they get cut off from the rest of the world and have to survive in a hospital with what they have, water. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
But the point is, technologies exist to survive these kinds of things. And if they don't, they can be invented. Research the heck out of it. Allocate huge amounts of resources. Because all of these problems, anytime we talk about a problem from a natural disaster, like a fire or a flood or all these situations, there has to be an answer. It's just a question of why people don't resort to those responses, why they panic in the moment and try to resort to last-stage attempts to deal with an emergency. Of course, it's an emergency when it's happening, right? Like, you can't predict everything that's going to happen and prepare for everything that's going to happen. It's impossible. Weird things happen. There could be an alien invasion. The rock from space could show up and do what happened with the dinosaurs. There could be a super volcano, right, that erupts from the middle of the ocean and sends giant waves in every direction. What do you do?
But you can predict floods in a floodplain.
Exactly. So this is not that. This is the gripe I have with this thing. So for that camp where the cabins drifted away with the people on them and a bunch of them died, and that sucks. They knew, right? They actively sought an exception that they be removed from the flood, whatever, the plan that said that they had to renovate to be within the margin for where the flood was going to hit. The area of the camp that was above the flood, everyone survived. The area of the camp that was below the flood, not everyone survived. And so the whole point there was like they knew that part of the camp was going to get hit by a flood at some point. It could have been this year, could have been 20 years, could have been 100 years, but they knew, right? They knew. If you know that at some point catastrophic flooding is going to happen, right? Then every day that they don't have adequate preparations in place for whatever the location is. It's a profound failure of everyone involved, every responsible person, every adult who has agency and the capacity for reason, right? If somebody's willingly choosing to live in an extremely dangerous environment, if I live in a swamp and then my house sinks into the mud, maybe I should have made a house that doesn't sink into the mud. I think of actually, if you look at houses that are on stilts and places where the
Yes.
ocean has eroded the land. So there are places in the South where if you want to live there, you have to have your house elevated, right? That it has to be
Yeah.
above a certain height or you can't live there, period. That's the requirement. If we know that the floods are going to be a certain height, there's only so high a flood can go. There's only so much water. The volume of water dissipates eventually somewhere, right? It goes underground or goes into a river, it goes to the ocean. If we know that the flood's going to be a certain height, all the houses should be above that height. All the structures should be above that height, period. If that's what they know. And if they're not, right, build a wall. If you don't want to build the whole structure above that, then build walls and or build ditches, build big holes in the ground for the water to drain. So what you do is you give the flood water somewhere to go. I get really frustrated when I hear these stories of like things happening where there's ways you can fix it because we have things like aqueducts and we have things like canals. If you look at the series of dikes, is it the Netherlands? Where they have very sophisticated series of levees and dikes to control water. If they can do it, what's the impediment for it happening in Care County, Texas? What is it? Is it a political issue that they just don't want to do it because of money? Those
Strikes me
people,
as a political issue.
yeah, vote
Yeah.
those people out. Like at some point, this is what's frustrating about this story. It's like there was an answer, there has been an answer of how to deal with it. That exists. Technology is there, no question. The water for something like a flood, the water has to come. In this case, it was just a huge amount of rainfall. Okay, so why can't they just build a giant, massive rain catchment over all the buildings? All of them. Just a giant umbrella. It doesn't have to be over the entire county. It doesn't have to be over all the things. You just build huge ditches next to the roads and you elevate the roads as best you can. And you maybe put walls on the sides if you can in case of flooding. Look, there's all sorts of simple things they could have done. Berms, edifices, that just didn't happen. This is what is frustrating, I think, about parts of America. They know that things could be done to make it better, but there's a real disdain for government. Then it becomes what you're talking about, this sort of libertarian, everyone for themselves, no one gets help at all situation, which is just complete sadness all around when these things happen and people call the 911 saying I'm gonna die. They didn't have to. That there was a way to address it in time. There was, and they didn't do it. That they had the resources literally given to them, and that their political leaders chose not to use those resources. That is infuriating. Why does that happen?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that they couldn't have saved everyone. Perhaps they couldn't have even saved many more people than they did. You're also right to put it as a malfunction of the total system, not merely a malfunction of the 911 operators at night. It's just the two in the 911 center at that night, to me, puts it in the starkest relief. Puts it in, they didn't warn you adequately, because we do have meteorology. We can tell when it's going to rain pretty darn well, actually, nowadays. But you don't have the construction codes, and you built on the floodplain anyway. And all of that, failure. But then the final failure is even when you call in for death, they have to disconnect from you, because they have more people calling in for death. And you put it expertly in when you call it the collective action problem when the collective doesn't want to take the action, or when no individuals want to act collectively. But it is a collective action problem. To a degree, one is tempted from time to say of a locality, if they didn't vote for that, and they didn't prepare for it, and they were offered the aid but they didn't take it, well, what do you expect? There is that temptation. I don't know, it hits home for me to a certain degree. So I would say to Republicans, particularly Republicans in such areas, subject to the whims of such elected officials who turn down the aid. You know it. Radical libertarianism did you wrong. You know it because deindustrialization did you wrong. It did you wrong. It did, your children wrong in terms of they don't have the job prospects and they don't have the industrial base. Many people voted for Trump because they want some sort of greatness back. That the libertarians, or we got to cut every cent. You have the power to elect other people, and I hope you do, for the sake of the children that live among you that are subject to the floods. So it struck me as a very personal thing. I could go on. It's very frustrating. So, I don't know. Maybe we should just not build in floodplains? And I wonder what, at my reaction to this, slightly different than my reaction to the fires. Because you built in the fire zone, and it's a nice house, so you could have afforded to build your house better. But I guess I have a little bit of a different impression about people who built on the floodplain. They probably did so to save money, so maybe they're poor. A little bit more, this is a collective thing. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't build in floodplains. What do you think about that?
No, I was reading that the river, the highest it reached was 38 feet or so. So if they just built over that, right, 38 feet or higher, then the river would flow by, right, in the flooding, and a lot less. Actually, it would probably have to be a little bit higher than 38 feet because it could still like pool and surge. But the point is that if you think about flooding, anytime I think about flooding, I think about that hurricane that hit in Texas where all the buildings were built in a place that was definitely a floodplain and they flooded. And it was like, why were they built there? Because it was cheaper and because they could build there. And I think about Katrina. Why did it flood? It's because they were built below sea level, right? That the part of the city of New Orleans is quite literally under the ocean. And their response was to build levees, and then the levees broke, right? I guess the question here for the flooding that happened in Care County is, did they have levees, or could they have had levees? Why didn't they? Maybe the issue wasn't so much the flooding, but it was the river flooding, right? That the river went higher. You don't need to even build all the structures to accommodate or prepare for flooding. You just need to build a giant berm or wall all along the river from so that it doesn't, and under any circumstances, flood over the banks of the river. And that's where I think the collective action problem really did fail, is that they shouldn't be leaving these things to chance. If they have a way of responding to it, that's at least better than nothing, right? That's, I think, what galls me anytime I hear these stories. So the fire story we talked about, the response cannot be a last ditch effort to rely on like emergency services, because those things can fail. The last ditch response can't be for flooding to rely on emergency responders or 911 operators, because those things can fail and have finite resources. There needs to be a more proactive effort. In this case, where the people are voting for political inaction, right? Like a refusal to take resources and money that's sent their way to build a warning system.
Sure.
Part of it is a failure of just education, right? That our education system isn't adequately equipping people with the tools, the knowledge to address these issues head on.
Yeah.
Again, it may be one of those first world problem issues of relying too much on convenience, of thinking that the government can do a good job and can respond in time because of Hollywood or TV, where they show competent, effective, capable systems working, where you call 911 and then the helpers show up, people get saved, yay, everybody lives, or hurrah. But the reality is far more complicated than that. There are finite resources. There are real impediments, even if those resources were deployed to actually saving people in a circumstance of emergency. The same political leadership that turned down the money needed to put more of an effort of telling people, hey, we won't be able to save you, all of you, in time. So you need to make real efforts to have a contingency plan in place for these floods. I understand why political leadership wouldn't do that, because then it makes them look incompetent.
Admission of fault.
Yeah, and so people are unwilling to vote for people who look incompetent. We get this really thorny issue where the people who should be telling everybody who lives there, hey, this is what's going to happen if a flood of this magnitude occurs. Like you're gonna have to adequately prepare some escape plan, some contingency, build a raft, build a shelter, insulate your house. I don't know. Get a hot weather balloon. I don't know. Get a balloon and float above it. Like there has
Yeah,
to
a
be.
balloon, that's a good idea.
Sure,
Yeah.
you can deploy a balloon pretty quickly and it can float. Visual, right? These things exist. But the point is that like the people who should have been saying something better than nothing is better than nothing, right? Are also have to face the political realities that they're run for elections. It's against their political interests to say, look, we're not fully competent or equipped to deal with the situation in such a way that we can save all of your lives. So it may well be every person for themselves. You better be prepared when it happens because in some senses, that's the greatest tragedy of this. All these people in this moment of emergency have been taught to call 911, right? To seek help from 911. But all 911 can really do is marshal resources to a place, right? They can marshal existing resources to respond to a thing. And sometimes the existing resources are enough, and sometimes they're not. And in the situation where they're not, what then are your options? What do you do? That's, I think, where there's a real profound failure, at least in American society, of equipping people with the skills and the technologies and the, I don't know, individuality we've lost that frontier spirit of if a herd of buffalo are headed your way, you better figure out how to survive the herd of buffalo. If a stampede or if, there's an earthquake or there's a whatever, like you have to figure out a way, given the circumstances, to survive somehow. Circle the wagons, do something. But if people have become a little too complacent, a little too comfortable with living among nature, nature bites back. Like nature will just steamroll everyone. That is something we've talked about, is that civilization is a constant battle versus nature of trying to survive against a world that doesn't care. That's just going to do what it's going to do. Storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and fires, whatever, right? They're going to happen. And it's just using the existing tools that we have to devise a way to survive against that. We're not always going to win. People aren't always going to win against the things that happen. Things are too strong or too great or too significant to prepare against. Earthquakes can get really big. There's that big one, the Cascadia earthquake, whatever it's called, where it's going to just knock out a highway or whatever. It's going to be huge. Can you do against that? Not much. I don't know.
Yeah, that one's harder because it hasn't happened yet, so you don't know the actual scale, what it's going to be. You don't know when, whether it's now or in 100 years. I'd say that one's a lot harder.
That one's tough, right? What can you do if the very earth is rent asunder? That's a little different. Floods,
that's different.
It's water and it's debris. Those are the big things. The issues with floods is you can't see what's in the water. And then there's electricity, so you can get affected by electricity hitting the water, so that sucks. And then there's the water itself and how fast it's moving, right? Water, humans figured out a long time ago. It's called boats, right? Maybe they do need something like an ark, right? A floating ark that everybody can just jump aboard.
But frankly, a boat, one of those quick inflating boats, would probably be a better idea than a balloon.
Bouncy castle, right? A bouncy castle with walls. It doesn't matter as long as it's something as opposed to nothing. That's the issue, is that give everybody their own personal raft. Some people might make it, some might not, but it's better than no one making it or hundreds of people dying because they didn't have adequate tools to respond to the flood that's happening. Part of the issue is just straight up panic, right? Is that people don't know that a situation occurs that you don't understand because it's so rare or it seems so daunting that people just they freeze, they panic, they don't know what to do in that situation or how to act, and then they get stuck. They get up against a rushing wave of water. Time was running out, and it's like, what do I do? It's especially for some of these floods, they happen in the middle of the night, so people were asleep. Without those warning systems, how do you even know?
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. In some level, there really is not a good substitute for a good old-fashioned Claxton. It's like, wake up, you are in danger.
Exactly. Frankly, that was a failure, right? That they weren't adequately warned in time. There are still ways around that. So if everybody within the floodplain slept on a floating bed, even something like that, if your bed can be used as a flotation device, or everybody has a life vest right next to them at all times, It can't be that expensive to give everybody a life vest. People just drowned. They got overwhelmed by the water, rushed down, drowned. So you give them something that they can float on. It's better than nothing. This is the whole thing. It's like there's a whole list of things that could have been better than what happened. And so the question, I think, for any time this circumstance happens is what could we have done better? It's going to happen again. It's a floodplain, right?
Yeah.
They know there's going to be another flood. So what do they have to do to be prepared? It's a tragedy, no question, but there's lessons from failure.
I have an idea for a budget survive a flood kit. 3 elements. Claxtons, those are probably the most costly. Boats, inflatable boats, life rafts, people get them, and a brochure. And the brochure is called Live to Tell the Tale. Or, I don't know, something. Or maybe a series of TikToks. Here's what to do. Yeah, make it a little fun.
Probably what can be said for this is that nothing can be done about the fact that it happened, right? But moving forward, anywhere in the country that there is a floodplain should heavily invest in ways to survive floods, right? Give everyone an inflatable raft, give everyone a life vest, give everyone some kind of food or water or whatever that at a minimum they don't sink into the flood as it's rushing towards them. Give them a fighting chance. It's better than nothing at all as a response. The second thing would be for cars in these floodplain areas is there should be a real effort made to figure out how to turn these cars into amphibian cars. That may be expensive, but it's better than, again, dying in a flood because you're trapped in your car and can't get out. At a minimum, some way to deploy like a raft under a car so that it floats up in a flood. Some mechanism to make sure that the car doesn't sink or doesn't flood itself would be better than the alternative. Because the problem with a flood when you're in a car is that it's really difficult to open the doors of the car or the windshield, that eventually the car gets submerged, and then if you're stuck in a submerged car, it gets filled with water and then you die. So the thing to do would be figuring out a way to not submerge the car. And there's got to be a way. There has to be a way to do this, because there are amphibious vehicles. There are things the military has to traverse water with a personnel carrier. There's got to be a way. And just the question is how to figure out a cheap enough way for people to do it who are stuck in cars. Because there's no question, if somebody's trapped in a vehicle, it's not so clear emergency responders could even help them in the vehicle submerged by the flood, right? So there has to be some way, some technology that exists. And if there isn't, invest heavily, whoever the powers that be, then invest in research this, right? Research a way to make materials or composites or technology to bilge out a car stuck in a flood.
We just need to put 5 MIT grads on it.
Whatever it is, just do that, right? Yeah. The technology would be helpful for everybody dealing from tidal waves to floods, and climate change isn't getting better. The world is definitely going to get hit by more extreme weather events. I don't think that suddenly we're going to reverse course and climate change is going to improve significantly. I think given the current administration and the real animus towards climate-friendly technologies like wind and solar, that the U.S. is moving again towards coal and oil. Those scientists, I don't think, are wrong that the world's getting hotter and the situation's getting worse. One of the real struggles is figuring out how to mitigate those problems now and into the future. Future inventors of the world figure out that. Inflatable cars and ways to survive floods, a snorkel or something, or scuba gear for everyone.
Oh man, snorkel.
Who knows? Right, there's got to be a way, though. There's got to be better than nothing. There's got to be a way. There has to be. We know how to have boats, right? Like, we can get on the ocean with a boat. Give everyone a mini sub. I don't know.
Something like
Something. There's got to be a way. There has to be.
Yeah.
Or the alternative is you don't build at all in floodplains, or you build on stilts, everything up 40 or 50 feet, or floating houses. Who knows? But there's got to be something, right? Hovering houses. Press a button and you hover up.
How about a brochure? How to survive Waterworld. It used to be a Kevin Costner flick, but is it our world of tomorrow? Tomorrowland? Try Waterworld.
Ever see The Day After Tomorrow? Everything gets covered in ice and water, and you got to traverse huge tracts of frozen land because of superstorms. There's got to be something. This is America's the land of innovation. We had a president who said we're going to go to the moon, and boom, we went to the moon.
Yeah.
It happened.
Mhm.
It didn't take that long.
Well, yeah, it only took 8 years.
Hey, that's not too bad. That's not too shabby. From the time
yeah.
humans figured out fire to figuring out manned flight, that took way longer.
These days, that's about how long it takes me to get through rush hour traffic, so.
The point is, these are all problems for now. They don't have to be problems forever of how to deal with natural disasters. It's just a question of finding the political will and finding the courage to just try new and innovative solutions to old problems, right?
Where there's a political will, there's a political way.
I am an optimist on this particular issue that if there's a way to address something that we know can be addressed, that it will be addressed at some point. Some natural disasters, no way to really adequately address them now. So a massive volcano, tough. A really large asteroid that hits the planet, not so easy to deal with. A fault breaks in the crust or in the Earth's plates or whatever, and leads to a giant earthquake. Not so easy to deal with, right? The whole world's rent asunder. Tough. But things that can be addressed, at least to some degree, fires, floods, some of these other kinds of disasters that aren't insurmountable, right? If they can build walls to survive tsunamis, they can build walls to survive floods. Same.
Yeah, that's right.
Same exact. And I guess it may be counterintuitive. It's like, why do we build a 40-foot flood wall in a place that only gets a flood once a century? Because of that flood once a century.
Yeah.
That's. I'm reminded of that town in Japan where they had a mark on the wall, or like a. It was like a monument that said, "This is the highest the tsunami's ever been," and the mayor of that town said, "Okay, we're gonna build a flood wall over that mark, right? Like it's gonna be higher than all the other flood walls and all the other towns and cities in Japan." Guess what happens when the tsunami comes? That town survives, and the other towns get covered in water. Like it, there are ways to address it. That mayor had political courage for sure, because he took a lot of flack from everyone. They're like, "Why are we spending all this money and resources and effort to do this?" And then after the fact, he said, "That's why." I don't think he's. I'm exaggerating. I don't know what he actually said, but
that's what he should have said. He might have said it in Japanese.
Sure, but the point is, like, that's why our town survived and everything else didn't. So, like, me,
Yeah.
He made the choice, and so it's same deal here. There's got to be a way to address these things that's not throw your hands up in the air and pray. It's like when someone's calling with minutes left to 911 saying, "Help me," what can they do? What can 911 do? What can the emergency responders actually meaningfully do? They can't be everywhere all at once. There's only so many, period. For any kind of emergency response, it's always going to have a lag time between when the emergency occurs and when the response can happen, especially for a country as big as the US because of distance and the limits of vehicular transportation.
Yeah.
Only so many planes, only so many helicopters, only so many boats.
Mondays with Mike.